Hello and welcome to the first in a series of discussions about libertarianism in the United Kingdom. I'm joined today by Andrew Withers, who's founder of the Libertarian Party UK and former leader. Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
No problem.
So we'll crack straight on, shall we? My first question for you is, what is a libertarian and how did you come to be one?
A libertarian is somebody who espouses personal liberty. One of the problems that we have, even amongst people who would actually probably term themselves our allies, is that they see that personal liberty is just actually the freedom to do anything that you actually want. That is not being a libertarian, that is actually being an anarchist. A libertarian is somebody who espouses personal liberty, and on the other side, which is the flip side of the coin, is taking personal responsibility for their actions. I came to libertarianism by way of classical liberalism. I actually term myself as a classical liberal due to the fact that we have actually had the term liberal hijacked in both America and in the UK. In America, the term liberal is actually now being used almost as a derogatory term for somebody who's a socialist. And in this country, we have the not so liberal and not so democratic Liberal Democrats, who are effectively an offshoot of the Labour Party for all intents and purposes, as being slightly more respectable. But at the end of the day, they still espouse collectivism as the source to all of the solutions of all the problems that we actually face in this country.
And how yourself did you come to be a libertarian?
I can't even remember what the trigger point was. We actually founded the party, and I'm not just one founder, I'm one of 5 that actually founded it. There was something that happened and I can't even remember it, and it actually gets one of those trigger points and you think, that's it, enough. What can we do to actually overturn this? And there was quite a few of us actually could see the tidal wave, the tsunami of the financial crisis actually coming. And it still staggers me today that professionals in the Bank of England and all these people who pay vast sums of money to actually see this couldn't see it coming. Within probably a week, 2 weeks of actually founding the party and going through the registration process, there were people queuing up outside Northern Rock in Newcastle wanting their money out. An event that has not happened for 152 years. And we're still living with that today, with NatWest, which is part of the RBS group, still bankrupt, still taking money off the taxpayer. And there comes a point where you have to start being active and actually opposing this sort of activity where billions of our grandchildren's money that are not yet born are actually going to be bailing out effectively the mistakes of this current generation and the previous generation.
So we're going to go slightly off topic or off plan slightly, which is because there are 2 big issues at the moment in recent times, which is the by-elections we had in Stoke and Copeland, but more pressing than that is local business rates, which are absolutely skyrocketing, and it's causing a lot of businesses consternation. So my question to you, Andrew, would be, what would you or the LPUK recommend that we do about that?
Well, the LPUK follows the standard libertarian text that all taxation is theft, mainly due to the fact that it's taken at force. If you don't pay, you go to jail or you're fined heavily. Now, at the end of the day, taxes are fine if they're actually delivered by consent. I can't think of anybody in any business community and anybody who actually values having a high street and diversity of businesses, valuing people from local authorities queuing up outside a small sweet shop and saying, right, we need to increase your level of taxation by N amount %. Especially when an awful lot of that money is actually going not to providing services, which could be negotiated between the local authority concerned and the shopkeeper or the business owner as to where this money is actually being spent. Unfortunately, where a huge chunk of this money is actually going to is to fill in the black hole that is in the public servants' pension scheme, which has been largely underfunded for the last 30, 40 years. It's a true scandal, and at the end of the day, the stopgap measure that say Javid is actually bringing forward is to let's give people a subsidy to actually pay them taxes.
Let's give them back the money.
Let's give them back the money. Yes. So it's a very bizarre way of actually going on. The Libertarian Party would have business rates stopped. It's a taxation on jobs. It's a taxation on business. And literally, you actually get to the point where you're going to have businesses just ceasing trading because they just can't afford to pay the taxes and the staff. This coupled with, it's another issue completely, with minimum wage, which is actually killing jobs. And if the priority of the state is to have jobs, they're going the best way about actually killing them, other than actually creating more accountants, more lawyers acting for them, dragging business owners through the courts to force them to pay rates or business tax that they can't possibly afford. It's lunacy, and we're fairly fortunate. And I never thought it would actually happen in my lifetime, where we would actually see a government actually panicked into actually saying, hang on a minute, we're gonna have to head this off. Tax is starting to become a real problem. So I'm pleased to actually see that it is an issue that's actually finally come to the floor.
Yeah, and it's very interesting what you say about the minimum wage and living wage, because there's a pub local to me where they actually already pay their staff a living wage, or what they define as a living wage, but essentially above minimum wage. They give them holiday time and all that sort of stuff. Whereas most people probably working in your average pub would get just the minimum wage, and that would be it. And because of these business rates, and I think theirs have gone up something like a couple of 100% or something ridiculous, they're now potentially going to have to close the business, close the pub, sack all these people, and then what comes in their place? It's actually crazy.
And then on the other side of that, these people then who are actually part of the productive economy are then forced to actually go and claim the dole.
Yes.
How does this help anybody? It's lunacy, and this is where we actually come to, and it's something we'll probably deal with later, is state corporatism. Is literally we're trying to have an economy that is actually being run by central planning, by decisions that are made by probably a couple of hundred people sitting in and around the walnut desks of Whitehall, making decisions that should be taken at local level. Going back to where my starting point was, business rates really need to be actually set with business people in conjunction with the local authority. Let the business people ask questions. Going back to a few years ago when I was a councillor, we had the ridiculous situation where completely illegally, virtually every authority to a greater or less extent had invested in Iceland because they were promising 4 to 5% over the odds returns. The rules were quite straightforward, quite understandable. The money that you actually invest as a local authority has to be instantly convertible into cash for the benefit. It wasn't. It was parked in a country that was outside the EU. And literally the local authority, the area I lived in, were maintaining for years afterwards, they were maintaining this money was actually going to come back. They were purely relying on the fact that central government were going to bail them out. I will never forget the early morning phone call I had from the district auditor's office and said, I've seen this report that you've prepared. This is dreadful. We can't do this. And I said, unfortunately, you can't investigate this. And the man on the other end of the phone was most perplexed. And I said, because your authority has also invested in Iceland and lost the money. And I think the total amount of money that was actually lost in Iceland through negligence was £1 billion. To now come back and actually say to business, well, effectively, you're going to have to replace that money that we foolishly lost. Unfortunately, a lot of what goes on in local government is not very well reported, and there is no negotiation between the people who are actually funding this, because they just feel they're having the gun put to their head and said pay up or else, or you end up in the county court. I am pleased, and I'll say this again, that taxation and local taxation is now coming to the fore as a major problem. And the speed in which, say, Javid backed down was incredible. And I see great hope for the future in this.
Well, I think taxation is something that we're going to keep going back to again and again in our conversation today. Just quick thoughts on the by-elections in Stoke and Copeland. Obviously, Labour held Stoke, fought off the UKIP challenge, but they lost Copeland with quite a serious loss in the end, I would say.
Well, I think that Copeland, as far as I'm concerned, actually just knocks tribalism, political tribalism into a cocked hat. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the lady who's actually won this, but she was a well-known activist.
Yes.
She was very well known for actually saving one of the local schools. She was liked, she was trusted. The Conservative Party obviously thought, this is somebody who's local, who's actually got a track record. My view on this, and this is one of the ways I actually got into local politics, was due to the fact that you have to put something in rather than just stand there with a badge on you saying, I'm red, I'm pink, I'm green, I'm blue, and you vote for me because of the colour of the badge I'm wearing. It's the personality who's actually standing that's important. And I think probably without that local personality, Conservatives wouldn't have done so well. The nuclear, Jeremy Corbyn is right, and Mr McDonnell are right. The antithesis of the current Labour Party towards nuclear power was a huge factor. There's no getting away from it. But the other side of that was the fact that the NHS, that was the main area, because the Labour Party, being a bit lazy, oh yes, everybody loves the NHS, they campaigned virtually solely on that issue to the exclusion of everything else. And it's a real eye-opener that not only did the people of Copeland not accept that, it's also when you've got a major newspaper like The Sun now turning around, we're actually saying the NHS now is a very, very sick cow, sacred cow. Things are changing, much for the better, and we are living in optimistic times.
I wouldn't worry about forgetting the lady's name, because Matt Hancock, who's a Tory MP, couldn't remember either of his own candidates.
Well, going on to Stoke, I'm afraid that UKIP lost that from the personality that they actually, the leader of UKIP, and I really don't want to decry UKIP, but I mean, I'm completely lost on how many times we've had changes of leadership with UKIP. Having somebody who is living in a bit of a fantasy world with his background as a doctor and his background as a professional footballer and how many of his relatives or friends died at Hillsborough. They're taking working class people and ordinary people for being stupid. They actually have got into this mindset, and most professional politicians do this, that people are stupid. And you can lie to people so long. And the first wave of opposing all of this started coming when the expenses scandal broke out. People were furious, and I actually believed at that point we were almost on the verge of a revolution. But we weren't, but literally it rumbles on. And if professional politicians want to see the root causes of Brexit, the root causes of even Donald Trump getting in, they need to go back and examine their own consciences and how they've been behaving for the last 20 years.
Very true. So we're going to move on to everyone's favourite topic now, which is Brexit. And what was the party's position on Brexit? And
the party's position
and Europe
was,
in general, I guess.
The party's position on Brexit is the fact that we believe in minimal government. We don't believe in supranational government. So we were never ever going to want to see any benefit in actually having an imperial government based in Brussels and reducing this country effectively to the status of a district council. I was not personally surprised when it actually did go Brexit way. I was overjoyed. And the question now, if you want, I'm not the party spokesman on this issue, but if you want my personal opinion on this, is we're probably going to send a nice little letter with declaring Article 50 unless another load of lawyers actually jump up and down in the Supreme Court, which is another issue of are the people sovereign or is it Parliament sovereign? We need to actually get that sorted out, and the party's position on constitutional reform is there for all to see, and it's been there from day one, from the party's foundation. As far as going on to Brexit and Europe, the question is now, in 2 years, after 30th of March, or whenever this letter's actually delivered, is will the EU still be there to leave?
Yes.
That is the major question. In Holland, they're now trying to head off Wilders' party by actually saying they're going to have a parliamentary inquiry into whether they ought to dump the euro. Sweden has also stayed out of the euro. France is now in turmoil about whether, I don't believe Marine Le Pen's actually going in due to the vagaries of the French electoral system. But the whole of Europe is up in arms, and it's from the bottom up where this is all coming from. And it just amazes me that people like Verhofstadt think the solution to this is more of the same, more integration. The man is living in cuckoo clock land.
Cloud cuckoo land.
Cloud cuckoo, that's the one I was actually looking for. But they seem to have completely lost the plot as well. They seem to have no solution to their own problem. And it's a problem of their own making. If they'd have actually listened to the people of Europe instead of actually going off on a discredited ideology that was set down in 1947 or whenever whatever it was called then, it was the Iron and Steel Union of the Benelux countries, Germany and France. If they'd have actually set that down instead of this insane political union that has just taken over their minds to the exclusion of everything else, again, will the EU still be there in 2 years? In my personal opinion, is it probably won't be.
I think you may well be right. So if you're a betting person watching now, get a few bets in. So that sort of leads nicely onto the topic of immigration, which is yet another hot potato in the world of politics at the moment. What's the stance on immigration? What's the plan?
Well, personal liberty means, and libertarianism always subscribes to the view of free movement of capital, free movement of labour, and free movement of peoples. You should be able to go and claim a living wherever you think you can actually make it. The problem that we've got the pull factor of welfarism that's been in Europe for at least the last 50, 60 years. There is no point actually decrying people who actually want to move from desperately poor places to actually go and seek a better life. If they can actually sustain themselves and make a living without any recourse to the state at all, I don't think anybody, and they can contribute to society, that's fine. We're now we have actually evolved our stance, the fact that while welfare state is in place, there has to be controlled immigration. There has to be, because otherwise you're just importing more and more dependence on the state. That is unsustainable in real politics. Whatever the ideologues of extreme libertarianism, and there are those that we as a party are always actually trying to progressively persuade people we need to get to a point and carry them along with us. We don't subscribe to the fact that if somebody who's got skills that's necessary to this economy, or even if they've got skills that are better than homeborn engineers, whatever, we need to have them here to actually helping our economy. The other side of that is we should not be denuding Africa and India of much needed doctors, that they train them there and then they come here. That's dishonest. That is purely dishonest. That's actually effectively raping their future growth in their country and their social provision. The problem that we've actually got now, and this is the fault of the left, is we're now faced with mass immigration of people that are actually, and probably this is true, I'm not exactly sure, that have been told Europe is the promised land. You will get free housing, you will be looked after, you will have education. In some ways that's true. Now these people are paying vast amounts of money to people who are trafficking them across Europe. And they're not turning up in ones or twos, they're actually turning up and actually destroying their documentation at the border. And if we need to stop calling them asylum seekers, they're not asylum seekers, because if they are asylum seekers under international law, if they turn up at a border, at the first country they arrive at, which is the law, international law has been recognised for decades, with their documentation and express a wish to claim asylum for political or for any other oppression, or they're fleeing from war, that they will be accepted and they will be looked after. What we've got is thousands of people trying to storm the gates of Europe. And at the end of the day, the Balkan countries have actually started putting up fences again. We are also faced within this multitude of people that are actually coming with people who do not accept our culture, that do not accept our values. That is now becoming a major concern and is probably driving the destruction of the EU, because populist parties, and at the end of the day, let's face it, all political parties have to be populist, otherwise they can't attract votes. This is a major concern. And there's no good the left saying, oh, this problem doesn't exist, or as they have been doing for the last 15 to 20 years, anybody even tries to talk about it, shouting racist at them. It's a major problem. What the answer to this is, I don't know, but at the end of the day, we can't physically or economically or financially afford to keep on taking more and more people on terms of welfareism. It's already been seen on the pressure on our schools, on our hospitals, our medical services. Everything is under pressure. You cannot increase a population by 1 to 2 million of people who are actually making demands on state welfare without there being an effect. And cohesion is national cohesion is one of the problems that's actually going to happen.
You mentioned schools and hospitals. Yet more. There's so many problems in this country, it seems. Let's move on to the National Health Service. It strikes me that the NHS has become a sacred cow, as you've mentioned previously. Is it like the banks back in 2008 that it is just too big to fail?
Nothing is too big to fail. In fact, it's already failed. It's bankrupt. It was set up wrongly as a Ponzi scheme. It was pretending to be national insurance. If members of various shades of government over the last 50, 60 years have been directors of an insurance company, they've been jailed by now. It was never set up as an insurance company. It was a Ponzi scheme. And the Ponzi scheme is defined as something that means that the people who are actually benefiting now are paid for by new people coming in. We've now got a diminishing population of people because the baby boomers are actually passing through the economy. And so they're not contributing as much as there has been. And the only way that this can actually be funded is by actually increased taxation or printing more money, both of which are ruinous to the country. The NHS is bankrupt. And until the major parties accept that, and there's no good actually just going, and we've seen this in Copeland, the Labour Party went and said, save our NHS. Well, effectively, you're talking about a 1950s bureaucratic Stalinist organisation that has been covering up for years for its mistakes. It has £3 billion worth of claims against it from people for medical negligence. It just can't go on. There has to be a quite simple way of actually taking medical provision out of the hands of if I can just finish this point, out of the hands of politicians who are using it like a political football, and literally setting up, my personal view, and this is a personal view and it's not been endorsed by the party as yet, but literally it ought to be, medical health service needs to be actually set up similar to the Bank of England. It's at arm's length. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Government does influence the Bank of England, but at least they've actually got the ability to act independently and make decisions. That way, at the moment, anybody who actually pays national insurance or their taxes and say, well, I've paid my taxes, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that. It's not ring-fenced. It all goes into general taxation. So if you it's like road tax. If you think all the money that you pay on your car tax goes to maintain the roads, it doesn't. No. It's been paying for wars and other useless government programs over the last 50, 60 years. The money that is going to provide the welfare system of the NHS really needs to be actually set up as a separate fund, in effect. Everybody just says, oh, you can't touch our NHS. Look what happens in America, where there are people dying in the streets and this, that and the other. That is an extreme argument to have. There are hundreds of different national insurance schemes across the world which all work, and you don't see people dying in the streets. We've also got to examine whether, instead of just parking our old people onto the state once they've actually, and I have a vested interest in this, of parking your relatives onto the state and sticking them in a home where they're probably not looked after very well, and there's been plenty of examples of abuse, is whether we all ought to, and this is the other side of libertarianism, is where we need to accept personal responsibility for our old and our young and our children and their education, and actually be more active in actually saying, right, how much do we value this? I think the only provision that is actually going through, as far as government is hoping at the moment, that this problem will fade away in 20 years when people like me and the other baby boomers just, we would do the government a favour if we all dropped dead tomorrow morning. If all baby boomers born from 1947 to 1965 all dropped dead, I'm sure things will be fine. But we ain't going anywhere.
No.
Due to advances in medical technology, probably some of us are going to be around for a good while longer yet.
So, do you think the free market has a role to play in
Yes,
healthcare?
of course.
The classic example I always cite to people is, cars and mobile phones. When cars came about, not everyone could afford them. Same with mobile phones. But now you can pretty much have whatever you want at any price range, and there is something for everyone. And essentially, no one goes without. Really, the almost the poorest person in Africa can have the same mobile phone as the richest person wherever.
Well, as you know, I work a lot in Africa, and the one thing that startled me over the period of time I've been travelling out there and working out there is everybody and his dog seems to have a mobile phone. Yeah. It's wonderful, and it's opening up the world, and it's also improving people's standard of life because food now can be moved to markets where there's somebody can ring up somebody instead of somebody driving for 2 to 3 days saying, "Well, we need this, that, and the other." So, that the way that I think that we ought to be actually moving towards is where it all went wrong, apart from setting the NHS up as a Ponzi scheme, was the fact that the NHS simply nationalised buildings that had been provided for by the rich as part of their input into society. There was, in the 1870s through to 1910, there were hospitals springing up all over the place. There were schools springing up. And this was by voluntary subscription. It was by churches getting involved, community groups, trades unions were getting involved in this activity. And the local gentry, and they were always giving money or land and everything else. It was a community effort. The NHS just nationalised this asset and severed at that point the local connection between the school and the hospital. And we've got to accept that that system actually worked for 50 years. And now we've spent 50 to 60 years with nationalised assets that were taken from local communities. They're now saying, well, we've built all these wonderful hospitals. You've actually done these hospitals on off-balance sheet financing, the fabled PFI, which now means that to actually change a light bulb, you're actually costing £460 to actually do it. But that is part of the contract. And literally it's to keep it off balance sheet. So you're never ever going to actually have taxation equaling social provision. And at the end of the day, professional politicians are terrified to even start talking about NHS as a bust entity. The Sun newspaper, not everybody's favourite, has come out in the last 2 weeks and said, it is now time to have a rational discussion about this. Fair play to the Sun.
So moving on to education, we've had Theresa May in recent months discussing grammar schools, and tuition fees always seem to be on the increase. Again, what's the solution? What do you recommend?
I don't care at the end of the day. I don't care as long as they scrap the national curriculum. I want that scrap before anything else actually happens.
The Department of Education abolished as well?
Why? What does that... Why? Yes. Why does that exist? At the end of the day, the Libertarian Party has always had a strong commitment to having a voucher system. So literally, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, you are given a voucher. If you've been paying your taxes in, if we're going to maintain a tax system, you are given a voucher, say £3,000 to £4,000. Mm-hmm. You can go and spend that where you want. And if you want to top it up by paying to actually go to a more expensive school, if you want to add on another £3,000 or £4,000, you can add that on. If you value education, you add £3,000 or £4,000 on to whatever you want to do. What is wrong is that you're being asked to contribute to your child's education and to about 4 other children. Mm. If you want to actually put your children through private education, you're still going to have to pay your taxes towards the state system. That is wrong. As far as I'm concerned, we need to stop the national curriculum. The teaching of history, which is my specialism, is absolutely abysmal. I have actually seen some of the modern texts that are actually being rammed down our kids' throats. And I can quite honestly say it is no longer education, it is indoctrination. And that's what you've got to call it. And literally, perhaps I'm being very unfair on the teaching profession, but it seems to attract a certain type of person who actually has got a certain set of political views, and actually really quite enjoys actually having a captive audience that they can't discuss openly with them the alternatives. One of the reasons I was so late come to classical liberalism is because I went through school in the 60s and 70s being taught by overtly Marxist teachers who were always showing us films about revolutionary times in the 1830s, the Chartists, and how wonderful the trades union was. I had one teacher in a 20-year educational experience who actually was a classical liberal. And I think I may have actually picked some of this up from him, but it was just a little glimmer. But some of the stuff that we were being asked to regurgitate at O-level and A-level, I know the terms have now changed, was just virtually pure cultural Marxism. And by cultural Marxism, it means it was Gramsci who actually formulated this back in the 1920s and 30s. He never actually saw revolution against the state by the workers as ever succeeding. What he felt was, and this is what has been going on for the last 40 to 50 years, is seize the heights of education, of the media, and just keep churning the same old stuff out so it becomes normalised.
Yes.
And there are so many film producers and what are laughingly called lovies now who just now, I mean, I'm going to say this because I was actually watching the TV and there was some serious woman there, and I have no idea who she was, which actually saying this time of hate and lack of brotherhood and this, that and the other, we now must promote our art to actually ensure that our message comes across. And then the next breath, and the winner is La La Land.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I was one of these occasions where you just spray coffee across the floor.
They think they speak for the people.
They speak for the people, they don't. They're actually pushing a message
Yeah.
that's made them multimillionaires or millionaires or fairly well off or comfortable. And literally this is actually not doing ordinary people any good whatsoever because they're living in a fantasy world. A fantasy world where the state will look after them. And they used to have this phrase that started off at the beginning of the welfare state, we will look after you from cradle to grave. They're now not so keen on the grave bit.
Just going back to what you said about the voucher system.
Yeah.
The idea of that being to create competition between the schools and...
The idea of it is to create education.
Yes, but...
Because, I go back to the first point, is where you have a national curriculum where it's set down by the state. I mean, the state's not going to have anything that said, well, we'd like to actually you to teach stuff by Hayek and the rest of it, which is anti-state.
So the schools will be free to choose their own curriculum.
They're free to choose their own curriculum. And
so if you want your child to go to a socialist school or a
absolutely,
or a libertarian school,
if somebody wants to go off to a socialist school or that promotes socialist value, that's fine.
Yeah.
But don't force any child of mine or grandchild of mine to actually go to such a school. I'd like them to go to a school where they were being taught to think, not what to think. That is the bit where the voucher system comes in. The parent can say, I want my child to actually go to this or that type of school that I value, that reflects my values. The wonderful thing about this, it then gives diversity of education.
Yes.
And that can only be good for the country.
Well, let's hope that happens when we're in power. Right. Well, moving on to a topic that's quite close to your heart, which is constitutional reform.
Yep.
This is not one of my areas of expertise, so I shall hand it over to you, Andrew.
Right. And one of the first organisations before I joined any political party was I became a member of the Electoral Reform Society. At the age of I was 17 years old as a student. I just looked at the system that we were living under, first past the post. And as a 17-year-old, I thought, this is nuts. This is crazy. Where whoever actually gets the most votes in a constituency returns the MP. We've now got to a situation that probably 28 to 30% of the people have voted for the incumbent MP, which means the other 70% of the people who actually voted, and we're now getting to local elections dropping down to 50%. When we had the Brexit referendum, that was probably the highest turnout we'd had because the vote counted.
Yes. Whereas
what you're actually saying to 70% of the people who vote in parliamentary elections and people who vote in local elections, it's a safe seat. Your vote don't count. Don't bother. Carry on watching Coronation Street. Carry on watching, Man Alive or whatever you want to watch on TV or a cooking program. It's not going to change anything. It'll still carry on being the same. The Copeland seat, that's the first time that's actually changed hands since 1935. That's nearly 100 years. What? Are they actually saying that the people of Copeland have been universally socialist for nearly 90 years? That's crazy. And that's tribalism, which is wrong. So, campaign for electoral reform, probably, I can't remember the date when it's founded, I think it was probably in the 1860s. It's been going for quite some time. It's not been the most successful of organisations, but there are petitions now to actually get us over to proportional representation. And we've actually got, I don't know how many people live in Scotland. 8 million, 6 million, I don't know, something like that. But they've returned 52 seats.
Yes.
4 million people voted for UKIP.
Yeah.
And they got 1 seat.
Yeah,
how does this work?
Well, this is what the Lib Dems found. They hit this very dangerous lower than 25% threshold, didn't they, in the polls, essentially, and in what voters actually did. And then their seat numbers went down from, 52 or something to 8. The only issue I would take with proportional representation is the ability to get rid of a particular MP, like Vince Cable or Ed Ball, someone like that.
Let's not go there anywhere near Vince Cable. At the end of the day, it works on a list system.
Yes. And
the easiest way to do that is you have a recall system, which has always been in place with PR. That if somebody is, blatantly fleecing or utterly incompetent, like probably some of the people that you've just mentioned and one in particular, you do have the right to on a petition of 100,000 people, if somebody's been obviously fleecing the state, fleecing the job, or not even bothering to turn up to sittings in the House or look after the imposition, I can't remember what the proposal is. It might be 100,000, it might be as low as 25,000. If you can get 25,000 people to actually sign a petition saying this guy's got to go, you can actually force Parliament to actually rescind his right to actually sit there.
Well, that sounds
it's all checks and balances. The one thing that we've not got in this country is checks and balances. The Americans achieved that when probably all the radicals that felt themselves displaced when we foolishly had made the first 1660, when we had the Restoration, is a lot of the people who fought for the good old cause just upped and left and went to America. The Washingtons, Franklins, all families from the Midlands just went because there was no political future for them. So they actually could see all these constitutional problems, which were, and Jefferson quite rightly, very cleverly put checks and balances into the American Constitution. And I know you're gagging to actually ask me about Trump and everything else.
I'm not going to ask you about
Trump. But the one thing there is the fact that these checks and balances have actually been transposed. So he's not a king.
No.
Whereas we do have a king in this country, and he's not necessarily the elected Prime Minister, or she is the elected Prime Minister. We have a situation where we have the roles of Cabinet Secretary and Head of the Civil Service have been merged very discreetly into one role, into one person. So Jeremy Hayward, who sits at the right hand of sits on the right hand of the Prime Minister in Cabinet, and I can assure you that if he doesn't like something going forward into Parliament, it won't get enacted by the Civil Service. And we've had a number of people who were advisors to the Conservative government under Cameron, who just got into loggerheads with him and just upped and left. And I think you're probably knowing who the chap I'm actually talking about, who wrote Being Human, whose name escaped. Steve Hilton. And he just couldn't take it anymore because this guy was just a roadblock. Now, constitutionally, we've got to have checks and balances about people who are actually effectively running the country, who are not elected, or are answerable only to God and the Queen, and to a few of their friends that they were probably at school with going back 60 years. We need to move on. We need to have a written constitution. I know people say, oh, well, we've got a written constitution in America and everybody ignores it and everything else. But we've got to have a starting point. We're one of 4 countries that's not got a written constitution that protects the role of the individual. That is the reason why we've had to go back to the Supreme Court, and they were very reluctant to do it, to define where power lies. Power lies, and was established on the 14th of June 1645 at the Battle of Naseby, was quite simply, our constitution is 3 words. Parliament is sovereign. And that was fought at the point of a sword. We've now got a problem now is where 90% of the people in this country that actually believe that the people are sovereign, we voted for Brexit. And now you've got this raft of people now who are actually saying, no, you're not sovereign, only Parliament's sovereign. So if we want to actually put short people with no hair on a cattle truck somewhere and send them off to a camp, if those 600 people actually decide that's legal, that gets passed in Parliament, it's legal. That's wrong.
Absolutely. Talking about MPs and the number of MPs, would you like to see the amount of MPs reduced? And then that also leads probably onto the House of Lords.
House of Lords, abolish.
Yeah, right.
Complete anachronism. Yeah. No point to it at all.
No £300 a day for
no £103 a day for just keeping the taxi running outside, running in, signing your name, 300 quid in your pocket. That's an abuse. There's no point. It's a rest home.
Do you not accept the argument
it's a rest home for the... No, there's no checks, man. It's a rest... The Parliament Act dealt with that years ago. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's a home for the politically bewildered. So literally, you know, this country has a thing about, oh, I'll make you a lord. Oh, God. And literally, I'm a lord. I can wear ermine. I can be called lord this, that, and the other. And the amount of socialists who have actually gone through to say, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm never going to become a lord. And there they are, sitting on the red leather seats. Just abolish it. We don't need it.
And in terms of the
850 people, £300 a day, do your own maths.
Fair enough. And the MPs?
200.
200?
Tops. Right. Sitting for 6 months. And the best way to keep them occupied and not passing any more stupid laws is every act should have a sunset clause. Every act. Right. That will keep them busy for months and months and months. So if they're having to regurgitate and check that hopefully we can actually have the amount of laws on the statute book going down and down and down.
I don't think there's enough time to read all the laws, are there, in this country?
What I'm banking on is these people who are narcissistic enough to actually want to sit in there, and that if they actually have to sit there and have to regurgitate over laws, they won't want to be there, and we'll get a better quality of MP who's actually has got vested. And there's been some superb MPs over the last 100, 200 years. Superb. But there's been an awful lot of dross. Yes. Huge amount of dross. And the worst thing, as far as I'm concerned, is Parliament is supposed to hold the executive to account. The invasion of Iraq with British troops on a lie was probably the most... It was just a travesty. I mean, I don't know what else to say. You know, everybody else is held to account in this country, apart from Parliament. There were times when impeachment for abusing the trust of the nation was a capital offence. I still believe it should be. They should be held to account.
Well, absolutely. And an English Parliament?
Absolutely.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Right, well, I think we'll end it there. Andrew, thank you very much for being with me today. We're going to be conducting more of these interviews with other members of the party in the coming months, and possibly an exciting trip to Barcelona that we're going to try and wangle with the party leader, Adam Brown. But for now, thank you very much for joining us, and lots of links in the description to our Facebook page, Twitter, we're on minds.com, and please subscribe for more videos. Thank you.
Join the party, please.
Yes. Libertarian Party UK.com, and you'll find all the details on there.
Thank you.
Cheers.